Do you want to safely incorporate resistance training with your underage hurling or football team, but you don't have access to an S&C coach? You're not sure where to start, and you're unsure what's appropriate in terms of where to start them, how to progress them, or ensure they're actually getting the benefit from it. Then this video is going to give you a safe and appropriate system to begin resistance training, give you ways to deliver sessions safely and effectively, making sure you're progressing week on week, and you're adding some little bit of variety for the players so they don't get bored doing the same exercises every single week. There's thousands of exercises out there, but which ones should your under 14s, 16s or minors be doing based on whether they're male or female, and should it even be different? I've seen so many underage teams on the sidelines of pitches doing push-ups absolutely terribly, getting very little benefit from it and potentially increasing their chances of injuring their shoulders. When it comes to doing resistance exercise, it's not just about getting bigger or stronger or putting on more muscle. It's about targeting the areas of the body we use most when we're playing hurling, football, Camogie or LGFA. We want to make those muscles, those joints, the areas around them stronger so that they can benefit more in games. But we're also trying to target the areas that are most likely to get injured due to being a bit weaker or a bit overused to reduce the chances of overall injury. Instead of focusing on muscles, because we have so many in the body, we're better off targeting key movements that tie in the main muscles and joints of the body that we want to use. We're going to look at 4 key movement patterns now and different variations of each of those. Those 4 key categories are squat, hinge, push and pull. The first movement category we look at are squats. They're largely going to focus around both the knee and the hip, and we'll work a little bit more of each one based on the specific exercise you're using, where you load it, but also a little bit on your own general proportions or anthropometrics or limb lengths. The key muscles worked will be the quads and the glutes, and again a little bit more of one versus the other based on what it is you're doing. We have a mixture here of bilateral and unilateral, and this is where they really kick in. The bilateral will be where you're working both legs, ideally the same amount of load going through both knees and hips at the same time, whereas unilateral will either be focused on one leg or a little bit more load dispersed through one leg, while the other is used largely for balance. Your squat based movements, as you've seen some of the videos that are coming up here now, can be loaded in different ways, either at the front through goblet squats or front squats, at the back through back squats, or at the sides or front or back when it comes to split squats and Bulgarian squats. Which one you choose will be based on what specifically you're trying to target, what you're comfortable doing and what equipment you've access to. The main variations here, and I will generally start with goblet squats or a variation of, whether it be holding a medicine ball of weight or holding a medicine ball out in front, as you can see on screen, to start off that loading pattern instead of going straight up body weight. One of the main reasons I don't begin with just body weight is it becomes a somewhat different movement or hard to coordinate once you do add in some element of load, and also because a lot of adolescents going through that growth pattern can be quite tight through both the hips and the ankles, just a little bit of weight slightly ahead of them can help them coordinate that pattern, learn it and find the bottom position of the squat a little better. We can then progress that through to a front squat, a back squat if they have the movement qualities to do it properly, or our single leg variations. While these aren't necessarily progressions, they're just variations of, such as your split squat and Bulgarian squat. They're there more to ensure that you have an even level of strength development in one leg versus the other, as opposed to progressing the initial movement. I'll usually look to do 8 to 10 reps of our main bilateral movements here. They tend to be a nice mix of, you can do the movement a few times to learn it, you can load to an extent, you're getting some level of strength development and progression here, but it's not too many reps that you end up just doing an awful lot of them and get a little bit bored. Our unilateral versions, I might look to do 5 to 6 there. The upper limit would be 8 because you just end up doing an awful lot of them, particularly when you consider if you're doing 3 sets of 10 to 12 reps on each leg, it can just take a large amount of time. Ideally, you look to do 2-3 sets based on what it is you have time for, how the players have learned it or are learning it, and what you have time for in the session that allows it. Next movement pattern we look at is our hinge. It's largely going to be deadlift based or variations of a deadlift. It predominantly works the hip muscles or the muscles engaged around, particularly at the back of the hip, that being the glutes and the hamstrings. They're going to be your primary movers, and there aren't huge contributions from anywhere else, potentially the lower back to an extent. Again, we have our bilateral and unilateral patterns where we can focus on both legs at the same time or put more of an emphasis on one while the other is excluded or largely there for balance. These will generally be loaded at the front and from a hanging position. Typical variations here are your Romanian deadlift, your split stance Romanian deadlift, your single leg RDL. You can potentially incorporate a good morning, although I generally don't with younger players, or you can begin loading players with just a basic hinge while standing in a band. You'll see that video on screen here now, where the band is emphasising the load when you're standing up at the top, but it's largely weightless when you're down at the bottom because the band just isn't in any kind of stretched position. You can then see the other variations where we do add load predominantly in front through a bar, but also can be at the sides, particularly for the example in the split stance RDL, or if we want to bring our knee through on a single leg RDL, a bar can just get in the way. and that's why we use dumbbells at the side. One movement that's potentially up for debate here is a trap bar deadlift. I generally don't fully categorise these as a hinge. It'll depend some bit on individual limb lengths and everything here, but it tends to be more squat pattern based than hinge pattern based. Despite being called a deadlift, it just isn't really hinge dominant enough. It involves an awful lot of knee straightening or extension to be too hinge dominant, and therefore works the quads and hips fairly equally. A really good general strength building exercise, but if we are categorising everything up, it doesn't fully fit into either squat or hinge. First of our upper body categories will be pushing. When it comes to pushing, we usually think of push-ups as a classic exercise. While a really good exercise in their own right, they're often done really poorly, and consistently doing them poorly tends to increase our chances of getting injured from them, and is largely just not really developing any strength. The main weaknesses young players tend to have is a lack of stability or just general strength around the shoulder, and a lack of stability through the core. Both of those lead to push-ups often being done terribly and ineffectively. The key benefits of doing any kind of pushing exercises are making your shoulders, chest and triceps stronger. We can target some of those areas through other exercises that'll help us get better push-ups, but also just get stronger in general in those main areas. We can divide our pushing exercises up into both vertical and horizontal. You'll see a few of them here on screen now, and they can all be loaded with barbells or dumbbells based on what you have access to and what the players are capable of doing, and just the logistics of what you're working with in front of you, whether it be in a gym or on the side of a pitch. The most common exercise from a horizontal point of view will be our bench press and dumbbell bench press, where you can also include push-ups there. In terms of vertical pushing, we look at shoulder press, one arm press, and those shoulder presses can be done with either the barbell or dumbbells from standing or seated positions. If some players are unable to do push-ups, and we say that bodyweight exercises are better, but they're doing them incorrectly, then they're far better off to focus on doing some one arm pressing, some planking, to get those parts of the body stronger and build them up to doing push-ups, as opposed to the typical regression dropping to the knees and often just doing them quite poorly. Similar to squatting and hinging, when it comes to loading these, we'll still look for 8 to 10 reps and 2 to 3 sets of them. But if struggling with push-ups and a player can do 2 to 3 good reps, then there's no point in saying, okay, I want you to do 10 of these and end up doing reps 1, 2 and 3 really well and all the rest of them terribly. To be far better off doing 4 or 5 sets of 2 reps, building up volume and strength that way, as opposed to incorrectly loading, ingraining poor movement patterns and ultimately increasing the risk of injury. Finally, move on to our pull exercises. Now these are largely going to target the muscles of the back. There are a number of muscles in the back. The predominant ones we'll target here are the rear deltoids or the lat muscles, but there are an awful lot more tied in. While having a big strong back is really important for just getting on the field, it's also super important for just general shoulder health. A friend of mine that I went to college with is a current S&C at Connacht Rugby. And even when we were in college, he always had the rule, every time he goes into the gym and does a push, he's required to do 2 pulls. That means he wants to balance out all of the pushing exercises he's doing, push-ups, bench press, shoulder press, whatever, with double the amount of pulling or back work, just to make sure your shoulders don't become more rounded in, you're balanced it all out, and you have a nice strong back, just to keep that shoulder in a nice healthy stable position. General exercises here, and it can be a bit more difficult based on what equipment you have access to, will be your inverted rows, pull-ups, dumbbell rows, barbell row, lat pull down, or your chest supported row. Again, we can divide them up into vertical and horizontal, and which ones are best to do. Ideally, you'll have a mix of both, but again, it is quite dependent on what you actually have access to in terms of equipment. Whether this be at the side of the pitch, if you're lucky enough to have a railing, then you can do loads of inverted rows, but it can be more difficult to incorporate if you don't have access to equipment such as external weights or anything else like that. The big thing I'll say in terms of pulling exercise is, whatever you have access to, use a lot of it. You can go far higher reps for back exercises than a lot of the others. When I'm saying 8 to 10 reps, obviously you'll be limited in terms of the body weight of the players, how many inverted rows and pull-ups they can do. It can be quite few based on how strong they are and how heavy they are. But if you have access to anything weights wise and you can do a lot of reps, then feel free to up the amount of repetitions you're doing and move well beyond the 8 to 10 like it's suggested for a lot of the exercises before. Now that we've looked at the key movement patterns, how can we actually incorporate any of these into sessions we do throughout the week? One of the simplest ways is to pick one of each of the 4 categories and look to put together a little mini circuit of 4 exercises. That's where you can pick any variation you like from squat, hinge, push and pull, and just the players move from one into the next and around, and do 2 to 3 rounds of that. Instead of working off time, I'd highly recommend working off a set amount of sets and reps, or just reps in general, and you do a few rounds of that circuit. When it comes to working off time, players will often look to get as many as they can completed in the allotted 20, 30 or 40 seconds, sometimes completely neglecting strength benefits or technique. If you just ask players to want you to do 8 really good quality reps in whatever length of time it takes, most will take about the same amount of time, and just allow whatever rest is required to progress from exercise 1 to 2 to 3 and so on. Another alternative is to look at putting together supersets. Supersets are where two exercises are paired back to back, i.e. A and B. You move from A to B and back to A again. Once again, just still use the same sets and reps you've set out, so maybe 3 sets of 8 on each exercise. For supersetting, I'll generally recommend you pair 2 exercises from completely different categories, i.e. a split squat and an inverted row from squatting and pulling, so that muscles and joints get a little bit of recovery time in between each one as you move from one exercise to the other. In terms of where you can put this in the week, there's 2 to 3 main areas I'd focus on. Number 1, I'd replace the cool down. The standard standing around in a circle doing your stretches is largely ineffective. This is where you can put your strength training in. Based on what time you have available, it might just be a case to do 2 rounds of 4 exercises. You work through those, doing your 2 sets of 8 to 10, of whichever ones you've picked out that we mentioned earlier. Alternatively, you can use supersets there either. You can give players a few exercises to do at home in their own time, a little sheet with links to videos of some of the exercises, just in case any of them forget it, with some key cues around how to perform each one. For example, if you train Tuesday, Friday, you can ask them to complete these at home on Monday or Wednesday evening. Alternatively, at certain stages of the year, you can look to do standalone athletic development sessions. This is where you might start off with some jumping, throwing, plyometrics, speed mechanics, some top speed work, then incorporate more of the strength exercises we've gone through here. And instead of just sticking to the 4 exercises we've gone through, you can bump it out to 8 or more, based again on what you've access to and what time allows for. We'll go into more detail on progressing these over time, both in terms of load and what else you can use to progress them. But for now, it's just a case of learning the moving patterns, trying to incorporate at stages the players can actually do them. Because while some may be really strong and might need a certain amount of weight to actually get a benefit from these, it is also about just practicing the movements over time. If they've done a winter block of getting quite strong, you don't want to just leave it be completely. Keep practicing the movements. Ensure you're still able to do them, so when you come back to them later on the year and are in a position to add load, which you might not be while on the pitch, they're not starting completely from scratch again, as they've stayed on top of the moving patterns and are now just able to add load a little bit behind where they may have finished previously, but don't have to relearn all these again. If you found this useful, but want a simple system and a few reminders of variations on how you can incorporate resistance training with your team, you'll find a cheat sheet down below, and you might find this video up here useful too.